Happy long weekend. This is your video lesson over the Easter weekend for the start of Unit 5. This is definitely okay to do as a video lesson. It's a review mostly of trigonometry from last year in addition to our review unit this year. So I'm going to go through it relatively quickly, but again, you guys have the ability to pause it whenever you would like. So our first trigonometry lesson for this unit is primary trig. So we are going to review how to solve a right-angled triangle with trigonometry and then use primary trig functions to solve for side lengths. And first up, just a quick review of how to label a triangle. So draw any triangle, make sure it's got a 90 in it for today. The angles themselves, the corners, the vertices, they get capital letters. A, B, C, and the sides across from them. So capital A points to small a, side length, capital B points to side B, and capital C points to side C. So capital letters for angles, small letters for side lengths. And do not forget Pythagorean theorem. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Now that's generally just placeholders. Obviously the way we've drawn our triangle, don't be rattled by that. It doesn't always have to be A, B, and C, and they always have to have A, B, and C in the same spots. Just know that for this triangle, in this case, B is your hypotenuse. So it would be A squared plus C squared equals B squared. And as our kind of placeholder general equation, C is our hypotenuse. And do not forget, hypotenuse is always across from the right angle. Our three primary trig functions. So those 9 letters that you have to have memorized. SOHCAHTOA. The S stands for sine. Sine theta goes in order, opposite over hypotenuse. Cos theta, adjacent over hypotenuse. And tan theta, opposite over adjacent. So as long as you can memorize SOHCAHTOA and realize the letters go in order, you should never forget those primary trig functions. When we are doing trig, let's call this theta. That would be your reference angle. That would be opposite your reference angle. That would be adjacent, which just means beside. And this would be across from your 90, the hypotenuse. If by chance this was our reference angle, this is still hypotenuse, always across from the 90. But this time this is opposite of angle beta, and this is adjacent, angle beta. First example, solve for x to 1 decimal place. There are 2 ways you can do this. Number 1, Pythagorean theorem. And this time I gave you the hypotenuse. So when you're given the hypotenuse, it just changes a little bit. Instead of it being a squared plus b squared equals c squared, it's just c squared minus. So c squared minus the other side squared equals x squared. And if you type that into your calculator, 10 squared minus 7.5 squared, you should get 43.8. And that's not x, that is x squared. What undoes a squared? Square root. Now in this case, when it comes to trig, we're not going to write plus or minus just because we're dealing with side lengths and you can't technically have a negative side length. And if we round to 1 decimal place, you should get 6.6 meters equals x. Option number 2. You could use SOHCAHTOA. How do you use SOHCAHTOA? Circle your reference angle. It's never 90, remember that. So 40, label your sides, opposite, adjacent, hypotenuse. Now in this case, you could actually use any of SOHCAH or TOA just because I gave you two sides. Let's say that you want to do sine for argument's sake, or so. The S stands for sine of your reference angle, goes in order, opposite over hypotenuse, so x over 10. How do you get the 10 off the bottom? Cross multiply. 10 sine 40 equals x, and if we round to 1 decimal place, we actually get 6.4 meters. Now you're going to notice there's a little bit of a difference, just has to do with rounding. We're definitely in the ballpark for both, so no worries there. 1b, solve for x to 1 decimal place. This time you don't have a choice, you can't do Pythagorean theorem, so you're just going to do SOHCAHTOA. It's usually a good idea to write those across the top of your page for your question, just to give you a quick reminder. Reference angle, the angle I gave you, that's opposite, that's hypotenuse, that's adjacent. And then when you're deciding which one to use, you kind of want to get rid of the one that doesn't give you anything. So in this case, the adjacent gives us nothing, it's just visual clutter. O and H goes with so. S stands for sine. 58 equals 12 over x. Now we've dealt with this before. This one's a little bit curious. So when you have x on top, like we did for the last example, you simply cross multiply. For questions like this where x is on the bottom, basically you're just doing a double cross multiply step. So this is going to go up, this is going to go down. So essentially all that's happening is the x and the sine 58 switch spots. So x equals 12 over sine 58. And that means that rounded to 1 decimal place, hopefully you get 14.2 meters. Our example 1c, solve for x to 1 decimal place. This time we're looking for an angle. So circle your reference angle. This is hypotenuse. This is adjacent. This is opposite. Which one gives you nothing? Opposite, so get rid of it. Visual clutter. SOHCAHTOA. I have adjacent and hypotenuse. That goes with CA. C stands for cos. Cos x equals, goes in order, adjacent over hypotenuse, 22.5 over 30.7. And then I'm going to challenge you to do this in one step. So when you're looking for an angle, you're not just going to type in cos of that divided by that. When you're looking for an angle, you got to use cos inverse. You got to isolate x. And what undoes a cos is a cos inverse. So x equals cos inverse. So usually you get to that button from shift or second function. And then in brackets, put that. So that way there's no rounding. You just get your calculator to do the work for you. So if you enter it just like you see it, hopefully rounded to 1 decimal place, you get 42.9 degrees. 1D, solve the triangle. If you don't remember, solve means find everything. So maybe a good idea, let's call this A, B, and C. So give your angle some letters, then label the sides, A, C, and B. Make a little chart. So A equals, B equals, C equals, capital A, capital B, capital C, and then fill in what you know. So I know capital C is 90. I know small letter b is 22.5. And I know side C is 30.7. So you're going to have to find all of that information on your own. Now, from the previous example, if you're paying attention, capital A, we calculated it. It was 42.9. So that was an easy one for you. So you just have to come up with side C and come up with angle B. I'll leave it up to you as a quick self-check how you want to do it. But remember things that you have at your disposal. You have 180 degrees in a triangle at your disposal. You have SOHCAHTOA at your disposal. And you also have Pythagorean theorem that you could use. So I'll leave it up to you guys. Quick self-check, see if you can come up with angle B and side C. And if you are actually trying this, I would pause the video at this point and then come back when you're done to double check your answers. Okay, welcome back. If you paused it, hopefully you got 20.9 for side C, and hopefully you got 47.1 degrees for angle B. That's it for your review lesson. Next week, we're just going to do some review. Wednesday's your test. Thursday, some more trigonometry. Friday's the test rewrite day you guys voted on. Your seat work is a handout. The handout is on D2L. You don't necessarily need to print it yourself. Just get the questions from it and work through it. If you want to print it, awesome. Otherwise, have a very, very good long weekend. Hopefully the Easter Bunny is good, brings you lots of presents under your tree, gives you money under your pillow for your teeth, and all the rest of that stuff that the Easter Bunny does. Have a good one. See you Tuesday.